All right, Chavi, still hear me all right? Excellent. All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today. Begin by thanking all of our shir sponsors. So thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the Shiurim Vistrashus this month in honor of all of their grandchildren. May they, Meretz Hashem, grow to become the best version of themselves. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, the Chevra from the Daf Yomi Shir, for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drashos this month in the schus of Refuah Shlema for Yehuda ben Michal, son of our devoted Shir, Magid Shir, and Shir member of Kalman Akiva Kovacs. We hope that he has a Refuah Shlema B'karov. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Bill and Rezi Eskin, for dedicating the Shiurim L'Zecher Nishmas, Bill's father, Mordechai ben David, Rezi's mother, Tzivya Bas Moshe Aaron. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Milton and Melanie Gertner, in honor of the 10th anniversary of many members of the Shir who began the last cycle. Really, it's been 10 years. Today's the 10-year anniversary? Wow, incredible. 10-year anniversary of our Shir, Baruch Hashem. Many thanks to all of the Magidei Shir, and also a thank you to the past, present, future members of the Shir who give us chizuk and show up and learn each and every day. Wow, a beautiful, beautiful milestone. Thank you, Milt, for reminding us, and we should be zochet to learn together for many, many years to come. And with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Daf Chav Ches, but you would not know that from where we are starting today. So I'll say we are picking up Meretz Hashem on Daf Chav Zayin and with base, but it's going to go quickly. 27b. I'm sorry? Yeah, it's true. 27b, and we are picking up at the two dots va'afilu shifcha dida. I'm sorry. Im yesh eidim afilu eved va'afilu shifcha. It's right across from Tosfos Amar. So both say, remember again, just to orient ourselves a little bit. So we're talking about over here in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah that we saw about a city that was surrounded by an invading army. So there's an assumption that the women inside of the city are violated. Halacha l'maisa, if a woman makes the claim that she wasn't violated, that claim by itself would not be enough to attest to the fact that she wasn't violated. But halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah says, if there's an aid echad, if there's an aid, even if the aid is a shifcha, a maidservant, then ultimately, again, that is enough to solidify the woman's status. So the Gemara says, really? Is it true that even a woman's own shifcha is believed? Or mini, raise a question, the Gemara says, Lo tisyachi dimos. We'll say, just to give you context of this case over here. The halacha that we're dealing with is, a man gives his wife a get. Rashi points out over here, this is what's called a get shrivnera. A man is on his deathbed, he gives his wife a get. Now, again, what's the point? Now, this get is going to be chal retroactively a moment before he dies. So he's giving her the get now, it'll take effect a moment before I die. Put a retroactivity clause in a get. And the whole point of this is to save her from yibum. Save her from yibum. The halacha is Rabbi saying that after he gives her this get, he's not allowed to be alone with her. Because the concern is you get into a situation of what's called a get yashan, an old get. So the Gemara says, Lo tisyachid imo, after he gives her this get, he's not allowed to be alone with her. She's not allowed to be ela al pi edim. Of course, unless there are witnesses. In other words, if there are witnesses, then of course they're not alone. But technically speaking, if there are witnesses who could attest that halacha l'maisa, nothing occurred between the two of them, that would be fine. So the Gemara says, Va'afilu al pi eved, va'afilu al pi shivcha, chutz mishivchasa. Well, see, the exception is her maidservant would not work for these purposes. Why? Mipnei shaliba gasba. Mipnei shaliba gasba shivchasa. Now, we'll say, because a woman is very comfortable around her own shivcha. What does that mean? See, I will say, what's the point of having eidos? The point of having eidos is if the husband and wife are alone, and ultimately, again, there's someone else there, they're not going to have relations with each other. The concern, the Gemara says, is that a woman is very comfortable in front of her maidservant and would even feel comfortable engaging in relations in the presence of her maidservant. Therefore, the maidservant does not go ahead and serve as a deterrent. So you see from here that a woman has an especially close relationship with her own maidservant, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, her testimony shouldn't count. Amra papi, b'shvuya hikilu. Papi says, no. You're right. In general, that's true. But remember, we've seen this already a number of different times, that by shvuya, in this case of captivity, again, this is not literally captivity, but we kind of put this under the umbrella of captivity. Chazal were makel and allow you to even believe the testimony of her maidservant. That's Rav Papi's position, that this is a unique leniency, ultimately, again, by Shira. Papa says, Habashif Chadida, Habashif Chadidei. Papa says, it depends who's maidservant. When is there no credibility? That's with her own maidservant. With his maidservant, ultimately, again, she could serve in this Eidos capacity. The Shifcha Dida lo mehemna. Is that true that her Shifcha is not believed? Hakatani, ein adimeid al atzmo. A person in general is not permitted, is not believed to go ahead and give testimony on their own behalf. However, ha-shifcha dida mehemna, ultimately, but her shifcha would be believed. So both say that would seem to indicate that her shifcha does have credibility. Shifchasa nami ka'atzma dami. Now, both say a woman's shifcha is like an extension of herself. So you begin to see Chazal painting this picture that there is this close relationship between a woman and her maidservant, and therefore in issues of testimony or credibility, the maidservant is no different than the woman herself. Rav Ashi says, Hava haba shifcha dida. Rav Ashi gives an interesting interpretation. He says he rejects this idea that some cases are talking about his maidservant, her maidservant. All the cases in question are talking about her maidservant. Now, I will say this is fascinating. Mechsa chaz, the Gemara says, v'shifcha, mechsa chazya v'shaska. See, I will say, what's the problem with a shifcha? A shifcha sometimes will see things, but will remain silent. So she'll see something, and she won't testify, or she won't say anything about that which she saw. So Hassam, in the get case that we saw before, dishtikasa matirasa, we're simply remaining silent. Ultimately, again, is what permits the woman, lo mehemna, the shifcha is not believed. Hacha, but in our case over here, again, of the surrounding army, of where we're concerned that she was violated, Hacha, tishtikaso sarta mehemna. In our case over here, where if the shifcha is silent, then remember what happens. The chazaka that the woman was violated sets in, and halacha l'maisa she'll become prohibited. So therefore, again, Abba say when the shifcha goes ahead and gives testimony, ultimately she is believed. Says the Gemara, hashtanami asyo umeshakra. Why shouldn't we be concerned over here that maybe she's going to come and she's going to lie? She's going to say, my mistress wasn't violated when in fact she was. Rabbi say, this is incredible. Tarti lo avda. Rabbi say, the maidservant will not do two things. Rabbi say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. This is actually incredible. Tarti lo avdi, chadel mishtak, bikilkula, va'od tesi v'teshakar. I'm sorry, by the way, we're concerned that maybe she's going to lie in the get case. Rabbi say, we assume like this. A maidservant is not going to do two things. In other words, she doesn't remain silent and ultimately what? Also lie. In other words, what a shifcha will do is in part of her capacity as a shifcha, she'll see stuff and what? Keep quiet. She won't say anything. But tarti lo avdi, she's not going to lie. So in other words, I'll say it's interesting. She'll lie, I guess what we'll call how do they term it? Lie by omission, right? She'll lie by omission, or she'll lie by silence, but she will not go ahead and actively share an untruth. That's Tarti lo avda. We also listen to this story. Kihad Mari bar Isik. This is an incredible story. Mari bar Isik, va'amrele Chana bar Isik. So it was a guy. Mari bar Isik. Some say his name was Chana bar Isik. And what happens? Listen to this. So asa le'acha mi bechoza, amar le plog li benichse abba. So we'll say, here's the context of the story. Look at Rashi. It's not so far. It's crossing a little bit up. Acha mi bechoza. So we'll say, this guy, we'll just go with Mari bar Isik. Mari bar Isik is living his life. What happens? One day, a guy shows up claiming to be his brother. Mari's brother. So I'll say, look at Rashi. Shalach aviv sham v'alicho imo v'gadlo sham umeis aviv v'chazra le'iro v'tavachal b'nichse aviv. So I'll say, here's the case. Mari's father. Let's take a step back. Mari had a brother. He did have a brother, right? His parents, I don't know what happened. Maybe his parents divorced. The father relocated. Father went to live somewhere else, specifically again in a place of Chozah, right? Father went to Beit Chozah to go ahead and live with his brother. Murray lost contact with his brother. Okay? Father dies. There's an estate to be divided. Guess who shows up? Murray's brother. Right? Murray's brother shows up and says, "Hi, Murray, I'm back. So sorry to hear about that. Let's get down to business. Let's split the estate." So what happens? So Amrle, lo yedan lecha. Murray says, "Who are you?" Or in other words, okay, Shalom Aleichem, you're claiming you're my brother. I don't recognize you. I don't know you. So the Gemara, so they brought the case before Rav Chisda. So Moshe says, here's what you have. You have the brother, the quote-unquote brother, and what is the brother claiming? We'll call it 50% of the estate, or whatever, some portion of the estate. Murray claiming, listen, I just don't know who you are. So they come before Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda says to the brother, Murray's saying good. He's saying he doesn't recognize you. After all, the Chsiv, Vayaker Yosef es echa v'hem lo kiru. Melame shiyatza b'lo chasima zaken. Abba chasima zaken. So Rav says what happened. The pasuk says, right, in Bereshis, that Yosef had become the viceroy of Egypt. Yosef recognized his brothers. They did not recognize him. Why did they not recognize him? Why not? Because he left as a young man. Literally translated, he left without a beard, and now he had a beard. In other words, Yosef left the familial home when he was a young boy, 17 years old. So the Maisa, now he was a man, so they just didn't recognize him. The point that Rav Chisda was trying to make was what? That it's possible for brothers who are really real brothers not to recognize each other. It's possible. To which the Gemara says, so therefore Rav Chisda says to the brother, Amar le zil aisi sahadi da'achua'at. You have to produce witnesses that you are really Murray's brother. That's what you have to do. So in other words, Rav Chisda was saying, brother, the burden of proof is upon you to prove that you're really Murray's brother. Amar le, so listen to this. So the brother says, Isli sahadi umistafinu mine de gavra almuhu. I have witnesses. Here's the problem. My witnesses are scared to show up and testify in Beis Din. Why? Because Murray was very powerful. And so they're scared that if they come to go ahead and testify in Beis Din, that there's going to be some type of negative reciprocity upon them. So Amarle ledide, zilai sinu at delav achochu. So I say this is fascinating. So Rav Chisda turns to Murray and he says to Murray, okay, Murray, you have to bring witnesses that this guy is not your brother. So Amarle, Dina Hachi, Shabbos says, interesting, you can imagine this discussion. Murray says to Rav Chisda, like, I mean no disrespect, but are you sure that's the halacha? After all, hamotzi mechavera alav haraya. Rabbi say the truth is, this is like an open and shut case. This really is an open and shut case, right? At the end of the day, guy is showing up, brother's showing up, saying, hi, I'm here, I want 50% of the estate, right? Murray, we take him at his word that he doesn't recognize the brother. Okay, in general in halacha, whenever you want to extract money, the burden of proof is always on the extractor. So now Rav Chisda comes along and totally flips the responsibility and says to Murray, no, the burden of proof is upon you to prove that this guy's not your brother. First of all, I'll say, if you think about that, the threshold of proving someone is not your brother is definitely higher than proving someone is your brother, right? In other words, we'll say, what do I need to prove that someone is my... I guess the truth is, it's not so far off. What do I need to prove that someone is my brother, right? I need to prove really my paternity, right? My mother and my father, at least my father, this is Yerusha. So I guess to prove that someone's not your brother, you'd have to prove that someone other than your father is that person's father. Okay, the point that Mari says is, Rav Chisda, that's not the halacha. So we'll say, this is actually fascinating. Amarle, hachi de'inina lach ulekulhu al mi chaverach. Hashtanami asar, the Gemara says, Rav Chisda says, the truth is you're right, but this is what I do for you and all of your friends like you. We'll say, what does it mean for you and your, for all of you guys? So Rav Chisda says, Mari, you and all of your wealthy, powerful friends, this is the way it has to work. Now, we'll say, Rav Chisda wasn't being punitive over here. What Rav Chisda was saying is, there's a problem. Because people are reticent to come and testify against wealthy, powerful people out of fear of reciprocity. So Rav Chisda says in these kind of cases, there's no choice but to flip the onus. So I have to place the onus of responsibility upon you, Rami, and therefore again, you have the obligation to go ahead and furnish the eidos that this guy is not your brother. The Gemara says, Hashtanami asu mishakri. Aren't we concerned over here also that witnesses will go ahead and show up and lie? In other words, it will say, if we've established that people are afraid of Mari, and people are afraid of this guy Mari because he's wealthy and because he's powerful, aren't we concerned that witnesses are going to show up and lie? To which the Gemara says, Tarti lo avdi. So this is actually very interesting. The Gemara says, in general, we're not really scared that witnesses come and outright lie. What we're normally nervous about is that people know testimony and just don't say anything. That's what we're nervous about. They have information and they just omit or they just remain silent. But to be concerned that halacha l'maaseh they actually go ahead and actively lie, that we're not so concerned about. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, so lema ketanai. Rabbi says this must be a machlokes tanaim. Here we go. So the Gemara says, zu eidos ish zu. In this case, Rabbi say in this eidos. Rashi says over here, it refers to the eidos of shavuya. Remember again, in our topic right now, what we are discussing is, under normal circumstances, if a city is surrounded by an invading army, there's a chazaka. What's the chazaka? That the women inside of the city have been violated. That's the chazaka. So the Gemara says, however, you could have eidos, someone could testify on behalf of the woman that she has not been violated. So the Gemara says, zu eidos, this type of eidos, ish v'isha, a man could give it, a woman could give it, tinok v'tinokes, children, aviha v'ima, even her own mother or her father, v'achia v'achiosa, her brother or her sister, avalo b'na obita, but not her son or not her daughter, lo avda v'lo shivchasa, and not her servant or her maidservant. So I will say, here you have a brisa that says, the maidservant is not believed. V'tanya idach, another brisa that says, hakol ne'eman l'ha'id, everyone is believed to go ahead and testify on behalf of a shvuya, chutz mehemna ubayla, except for the woman herself and her husband. So the Gemara says, so the second brisa says that even who's believed? A shivcha. To which the Gemara says, you're right, Rav Papi v'Rav Ashi tanaihi. Rabbi say, based on the opinions we mentioned before of Rav Papi and Rav Ashi, they would agree that this is a machlokes tanaim. Rav Papa mile matanai. Would Rav Papa agree? Rabbi say, first wide line chav zayin amid beis. Would Rav Papa hold that it's a machlokes tanaim? Rav Papa kitanya hahi b'masicha lefi tuma. Oh, Rabbi say, here we go. Rav Papa says it could be that there is a situation of a shivcha where the shivcha would be believed, her own shivcha. When? Rabbi saying the concept of masiach lefi tuma. We've seen this already a couple of times. What's masiach lefi tuma? See, Rabbi saying there's a difference between when a person gives directed testimony, right? A person shows up and they say, I'm here to act in a testimonial capacity, versus when a person just shares unsolicited information. That's called masiach lefi tuma. I'm just conversing. There is a power in halacha to masiach lefi tuma, because since it's unsolicited and a person is just giving information of their own volition, there's a certain inherent level of credibility that's attached to that statement. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Ki ha dichi asrav dini amrav chanan kartigno. Mishtoi, Maisa Balafin Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. It was a story that came from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Formerly Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Mishtoi, Maisa, this Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi conveyed the Maisa. Balafin Rabbi, some say it came before Rabbi. Ba'adam Echashem Asech Lefi Tumo. There was a guy, and this guy was just conversing. What was he saying? Va'amar, Ani ve'imi, me and my mother and I, Nishpinu lebeina ovdei kochavim. We were taken captive. Yatsasi l'shov mayim. When I would leave my mother to go ahead and draw water, daiti al imi. I was always had my eye, literally my mind and my mother. I was always vigilant regarding my mother. The laket eitzim, to collect wood, daiti al imi. I was thinking about my mother. I would say, what was the son saying over here? What was the son saying? That I never let my mother out of my sight the whole time I was in. I will say, here's what's interesting. Then what happened? Rebbe allowed this woman, apparently her husband died, right? Rebbe allowed this woman to marry a Kohen based on the testimony of a son. Now I will say, we just got finished saying what? That normally the testimony of a son is not believed, bless you, is not believed to go ahead and maintain the kasher status, or maintain the status of his mother. Yet I will say, so why is the son believed in this case? Why? Masiach lefi tumo. So Rabbi said, what you begin to see, and this is how the Gemara ends, is that there's grounds to say that her own maidservant should not be believed. Because since there's a very close relationship between a woman and her maidservant, there's a concern that the maidservant may lie, may omit, may lie on her behalf. But what we begin to see, and therefore again, there's a whole group of people whose testimony is not believed. But also it's fascinating to see is that even in situations where someone's testimony is not believed, if the testimony is not testimony at all, rather what? Information, which is just conveyed in a normal course of conversation, then halacha l'maisa, it can be accepted as credible evidence as well. Incredible. Mishnah. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav said, Hama'on hazeh. I will say Hama'on hazeh is the Lashon Rashi says of Shavua. Literally again, I swear by the Beis HaMikdash. We should be zocha. I swear by the Beis HaMikdash. Lo zaza yada mitoch yadi. So I will say, listen to this story. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav was living in Yerushalayim, and there were invaders. Right? There was an army that came in and invaded Yerushalayim. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav is testifying about his own wife, and he's saying, literally, I held her hand. I mean, that's literally, but I held her hand the entire time, from the time that the invaders came into the city until they left. What was he testifying to? My wife was not violated by any of the invading soldiers. She was with me the entire time. So the Gemara says, Amrulo ein adam meid al atzmo. They said to Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, ultimately again, a person cannot testify on his own behalf. The idea being ishto kigufo, one's wife is an extension of themselves, and the same way that I'm not generally believed to give edus regarding myself, says Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav said he's not believed regarding giving edus about his wife. So the Gemara says, Tana, this is incredible. So I will say, this is pretty wild. So remember, Rashi points out a very important piece of information over here, which is Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav was a Kohen. He was a Kohen. So I will say, what's the halacha at the end of the day? What's the halacha if the wife of a Kohen is violated? What's the halacha? The halacha is she is asur to him. So I will say, again, I just want to point out, like, we're reading this story just in a little bit of like a halachically detached way. But what a tragic story. Here it is. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, right, in Yerushalayim Eretz Kodesh is invaded, and he's testifying about his wife. She's tahora. Her hand was in mine the entire time. Nothing happened. And again, the halachic process is the halachic process, and they say to him, look, we appreciate what you're saying, but that's not the kind of eidos that's going to help. So therefore, Rabbi say, what happens? Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav and his wife can no longer live together as husband and wife. She becomes prohibited to him. So the Gemara says, I'll say, it's just incredible. The Gemara says, Tana, the Afapikein, even though they could not live together anymore as husband and wife, Yiched la bayis bechatzero. She had her own home in his chatzar. In other words, I will say, he did not want to dissolve the family unit. He didn't want to dissolve the family unit. So they couldn't live together as husband and wife. But apparently, I will say, it sounds like they didn't divorce either. That's what it sounds like. They just didn't live together. And ultimately, again, she had a home in the chutzner. Right, the Gemara goes on, Kishi Yotza, when she would leave, Kishi Yotze Barosh Panah, Ukishi Nichnesas Besof Panah. So we'll say literally what it means is when they would be leaving the house, she would leave before the children, and when they were all together, and when they would come back into the house, the children would come in first. What's the idea? The idea being is they wanted to avoid yichud. Rabbi Zechariah and his wife could not be alone together because there's an Isser Yichud. You're not allowed to be alone with any woman if the woman is prohibited to you. His wife was prohibited to him. So the Gemara just says they had to make sure to always have the children present. Always have the children. Let's see, I'll just point out that, the power of a story like this is that sometimes when we have churban, like when Klal Yisrael experiences destruction, so the destruction is felt long after the enemies leave the city. There's collateral damage. There's always collateral damage. I'll tell you, like, lahavdil. They have studies upon studies of children, first generation and second generation offspring of Holocaust survivors. So I remember my mother, she lived me well, told me that when she was a child growing up, She had a kid in her class. My mother was born in the DP camps after the war. When they came to America, she had a child in her class who always wore shoes that were 2 sizes too big. No one understood it. No one understood it. So it turned out everybody were survivors. During the war, if you didn't have shoes, you were done. So the parents of this child had a chachma. They said, maybe someone like the Nazis, going to come back again. This way, if my child has shoes that are big right now, if they have to run, they have to flee, they'll have room to grow into the shoes. Let's say you think about what does it mean to be a child who always wears shoes? I know in the grand scheme of things, wearing shoes that are too big doesn't seem to be but there's baggage. Even once the invaders leave the city, there's collateral damage that continues to play out over the course of years. What a tragic story. What a tragic story. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatsav and his wife lose their ability to live together as a normal family. Right? Why? Because of invaders in Yerushalayim. It's just overwhelming. I would say to their credit, what you begin to see is something amazing, is that sometimes within a marriage, you just gotta figure things out for the sake of the kids. Right? Sometimes, again, things aren't perfect, but Lamaisa, there's a responsibility to a mishpacha. Pretty incredible. Bai brings down, Ma'ulasas begrusha. What about, so we'll say, this is a case, just want to point out, so the unique aspect of this case is, Rabbi Zechariah and his wife are married, right? She's asura to him now. They're not divorced. So they're still married, they're not allowed to live together, so they have to avoid yichud. Okay, would this work in a divorce case? Let's say a couple gets divorced, but Lamaisa, they want to co-parent effectively, so they have this great idea. What's the great idea? Let's live together in the same chutzner. Right? Not in the same house, obviously. So, but ma'ulasas begrusha came. So, can you go ahead and do this with a grusha? Rashi says, Kohen shegirish es ishto, mahu ladar imo bechatzer. Shabbos say, there's a Kohen. Now, why is Rashi framing this as a Kohen who divorces his wife? Right? Why? Because, like I say, he can't remarry her. As opposed to, also remember again, if a Yisrael divorces his wife, as long as she had not married someone else in the interim, you could remarry your divorcee. A Kohen can't. A Kohen divorces his wife. Okay, we want to co-parent effectively. It was an amicable divorce. So can we live together in the same chutzner? So the Gemara says, Hasamhu de b'shvu yehikilu hachalo. So also we can say maybe not. Maybe this is dafka a kula by shvuya. Right? This is a kula, like we have many kulas by shvuya. There's another kula by shvuya. But in a case of divorce, no. O dilma lo shno. Or maybe no. Maybe again, halacha lemaisa. As long as you're careful to avoid yichud, it should be okay. So Tashmar, let's analyze this sanya. Hamagarish es ishto. If a man divorces his wife, lo tinase bishchunaso. Now, this is actually an interesting case. If the woman remarries, right, the remarried wife should not live in the same neighborhood as her ex-husband. It's a concept like this, that a divorced couple, once she is remarried, should not live in the same neighborhood. What's wrong with that? Look at Rashi. Lo tinase b'shchunaso, lefi shemakira beremizosav ukaritzosav shema yavoli de'avera. Because we'll say, Chazal were concerned like this. Once a couple was married and had an intimate relationship, so even though now they're divorced and they are remarried, right? The woman's remarried in this case. Halacha Maisa, we're concerned that if they live in close proximity to each other, that could reawaken the feelings of intimacy. So therefore, interestingly enough, once she gets remarried, they should not live in the same neighborhood. Top of Chavchas, Vim Haya Kohen, Nebuah say if he was a Kohen. Now, again, remember, the distinction between the Kohen case and the Yisrael case is, this halacha is only triggered by a Yisrael when the ex-wife remarries. Because now she becomes asura to her husband. By a Kohen, the Isra is triggered when? Immediately upon divorce. So if it was a Kohen, then even if she didn't remarry, but they're divorced, those sidar imo b'mavui, they should not go ahead and live in the same mavui. Rashi says, Shema yavo alav v'kohen asa begrusha. Good. V'im haya kfar katan, what happens if it was a small village, a small village? So zeh haya ma'aseh v'amru kfar katan nidan kishchuna, that a small village, ultimately again, is like a neighborhood. It's like a neighborhood. So we'll say, so you begin to see something very interesting, which is that halacha l'maisa, what Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatsav did, living with his wife, who was asura to him in the same chutzner, was dafka a kula by shvuya. But in a case of divorce, the moment the divorcee, the moment the ex-wife becomes prohibited to her husband, which is in the case of a Yisrael once she gets remarried, or in the case ultimately again of a Kohen immediately upon divorce, they cannot live in the same neighborhood with each other. Out of a concern, they may come to be intimate with each other. So we'll say, now listen to this. Okay, so here's the $1 million question. Mi nitchem mipnei mi. Who has to move? Who has to move? Okay, so now we establish once she becomes Asura, so they can't live together in the same neighborhood. Who has to move? So Tashma the Sanya, he nitchis mipanav. She has to move. Ve'in hu nitcha mipanav. She has to move literally again. She's displaced in front of him. He's not displaced in front of her. However, of course again, halacha lamaisa, if it's her chatzar, right, if it's her chatzar, then he's got to go. Say bailahu, here's the kasha. What happens if it's jointly owned property? Right, so obviously what's going to have to happen over here, someone's going to have to buy out someone. But the shaila is, who has the right to remain in the home and who has to relocate? So Tashma, he nitchis mipanav. So we'll say, what did we say before? Right? How did this discussion begin? The discussion began with a statement that she is displaced and not him. In other words, she has to move and not him. So what's the case? When we made that statement, what case are we referring to? What am I asking on? If it's his chatzar, pshita. We'll say, obviously, if it's his property, then of course she's the one who has to leave and he's the one who's able to stay. Rather, it must be her chatzar. That can't be vatanya. We'll say, if it's her chatzar, then obviously he has every right to stay put. Elalav. Ki hai gavna. We'll say, must be that what? What's the case? What's the case where the Brisa said before that she has to leave and he can remain in the home? It must be a case of jointly owned property. Right? So you see that in the case of jointly owned property, he has the right to remain and she has to leave. Tushik says, maybe not. Dilma, da'agir megar. Maybe not. Maybe at the end of the both side, that's the case of where they're renters. Right? Now remember, if they're renting, what does that mean? Neither has a greater active claim. Maybe that's the case where he gets to stay and she has to leave. So we'll say, "My havi Allah." So we'll say, so bottom line, what's Allah? So remember again, we have two definitive cases. What are the two definitive cases? Obviously, if it's his property, then what? He's staying. If it's her property, then what? She's staying. So there are two cases that we don't know about. Okay, either a case of where they're renters, who gets to remain in the home and who has to leave, or when there's jointly owned property, who gets to stay. Obviously, they have to buy out the other party, but who gets to stay? So we'll say this is actually incredible. We'll say the Gemara says, Tashma, listen to this. Hine Hashem taltalecha taltala gever va'otcha ta'abosayim. The Gemara quotes the pasuk from Yeshaya, and the pasuk in Yeshaya says, Hashem will cause you to wander the way a man wanders. So this is a punishment for Klal Yisrael. You're going to have to wander like the wandering of a man. What do you see from here? Va'amarav tiltule gavra kashin mide'isisa. Let's say it is more difficult for a man to wander than it is for a woman. So we'll say it's actually a profound statement. Chazal seemed to feel that women have a better ability to adjust to new circumstances than men do. Right? Women have the ability to adapt to change better than men do. And after the dissolution of a marriage, where there's so much potential turmoil, so much potential change, let the man have the level of stability by remaining in the home, as this will allow him to rebound better. And the woman, who is more adept in change, ultimately, again, could move somewhere else. Fascinating. Good. So we'll say, now again, these halachas, of course, are more complicated than the way they're being mentioned over here, as there could be other factors at play as well. Someone's livelihood, family situations that, of course, go into all this. But if we're just looking at this as a property dispute, who gets to live in the house, these are the circumstances. Good. Tanu Rabbanan. So we'll say more have the halachas of etiquette when a couple divorces. Tanu Rabbanan. Lo v'heimenu b'nichse aviyah. Rabbi say, let's say over the course of the marriage, the husband borrowed from his wife's estate. Right? The wife has her own money. Let's say she inherited stuff from her father. He borrowed money from her father's estate. So now they're divorced. He has to pay her back. What's the halacha? He should not pay her back directly. Instead, he should pay her back through an intermediary, through a third party. And we'll say, what do you see in halacha over here? What's happening over here is, in these situations, is we want to limit contact, unnecessary contact, out of a fear of intimacy. Out of a fear of intimacy. Now, I will say, now again, these are all talking about situations where halacha lamaisa, she remarried, she's an Eishes Kohen. The idea being over here is we limit contact. Amr of Sheshes, the asul kama ladina, lo mizdaknin le. Listen to lo mizdaknin le. Rav Sheshes says, and by the way, if an ex-wife and an ex-husband show up, the two of them to din, we will not hear their case in a beis din. In other words, it's not even appropriate for them to adjudicate cases directly. Right? There should be a third party who then represents them. Interesting. We excommunicate them. In other words, we both say we don't want a level of connection between the ex-wife and the ex-husband. This is not talking about in terms of like co-parenting or things like that. The idea being that we're concerned that if they're interacting with each other, ultimately again, this could lead to intimacy. Rav Hun bar Yehoshua Amar Nagude nami minagdinan lahu. We'll flog them. In other words, the idea being is we don't want unnecessary interactions that can't be handled by third parties. Amr Rav Nachman, Tana be'evor Abbasi, we learned. But Medrash, when is this true? I was going to say, when is this true that the halacha feels the need to really place a separation between an ex-husband and an ex-wife? Only when a couple divorced after Nisuin. Why did I both say? Because after Nisuin, then what? They were intimate with each other. So because they were intimate with each other, there's a bond. And they understand each other, and they understand each other's cues and behaviors. And there is a concern that halacha l'maisa, if there is still ongoing involvement between the two of them, that halacha l'maisa, they could reawaken that spark of intimacy, which again, if she's remarried or ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, he's a Kohen, is halachically problematic. Aval kishniskar shemina erusin. But halacha l'maisa, when they were divorced from erusin, nifras al yidei atzma. Then I both say, going back to, let's say, the debt repayment case, he can repay her back directly. Why? She'ein libo gaspa. Because there's no connection. When we say there's no connection, what does that mean? What does that mean? There's no intimate connection. Because remember, we're assuming from erusin, there's no intimacy. They didn't live together as husband and wife. And therefore, we're not concerned about anything illicit happening. So Gemara tells a story. Hahu aros varusaso, daslo kamei derava. There was a aros and an aros, right? A man and woman, ultimately, again, who had erusin, got divorced from erusin, who came before Rava. Yosef Rav Adabar Masna Kamei, Uki Rava Shlucha Ben Saihu. So Rava went ahead and said, okay, I'm not adjudicating this case, right? I want there to be a third party that's representing one of you, because I don't want the two of you interacting together in the Din Torah. But one second, Rav Nachman said before that this halacha only applies to a couple who divorced from Nisuin, not a couple divorced from Eris, and Abbas is incredible. So Rava said, I see that they're a bit familiar with each other. I said, in other words, I see that even though they got divorced from Erisin, it looks like they knew each other intimately. Abbas said, by the way, we saw this. We saw, right, where is the possibility for this to have happened? In Yehuda, right, we saw that again in certain locales where the Chassan and Kala were encouraged to be together during Erusin. It's quite possible they were intimate with each other. Ikeda Amri, others say an alternate version of the story. Lo uki Rava shliach bad ben Isayu, that this Arus and Arusa came before Rava, and Rava did not set up a third party to adjudicate their dispute. So Rava Bar Masna asked on him, Rava, how are you allowing to go ahead and adjudicate the case just the two of them? Amrlei, Amrlei, Hanimi lihechid lo gaisi bahadadi. Aval hani kachazina lo the gaisi bahadadi. Okay, so we'll say alternate version of the story, but same basic idea, which is ultimately Rava perceived that they were very familiar with each other, and therefore halacha l'maisa wanted there to be a third party to adjudicate the case. Incredible. Says the Mishnah, Ve'ilu ne'eman laha'id begodlon mashera'u bekatan. Abba said it's a fascinating case. There are times, listen to this, where a person could give testimony as an adult based on something he experienced as a child. So in this case, you have an adult giving testimony, but he's testifying about something that he saw, that he witnessed in his childhood. What are some examples of this? Similarly, a person is believed to say, this is my father's handwriting. Now, we'll say this could be a case of where the father passed away when he was a kid. child was a kid, right? So therefore, again, he's testifying about something that he saw as a child. Or Zek Sav Yado Shal Rabbi. This is the handwriting of my Rebbe. V'Zek Sav Yado Shal Achid. This is the handwriting of my brother. Or he could say Zachra Yisi Beplonis Sheyatza Behenuma V'Rosha Parua. I remember that so and so when she got married, Rachel when she got married, she went out with her hair down, wearing a veil. Now we'll say hair down, wearing a veil was how besulas. If one was a besula, that's how she dressed when she got married. V'shahaya ish ploni yotzei beis hasefer. Listen to this. A person is also believed to testify. I remember as a kid in school that Aaron would leave school litbal le'echol truma, and Aaron would leave school to go to the mikvah, right? Leave school to go to the mikvah and eat truma. V'shahaya chaluk imano ala gora. And similarly, again, a person is believed to say, I remember as a kid, Aaron used to receive truma with us at the threshing floor. A person is believed to say this field is a beis hapras. So let's remember again, we know beis hapras is a field in which we know there was a grave, but we don't know the location of the grave because it was plowed over. A person is also believed to say, up until here we used to travel on Shabbos, which is another way of saying what? The Tchum, Shabbos boundary goes until here. Aval in, I will say second wide line. Aval in adam ne'ema lomar derech chaya leploni b'makom hazeh. So I will say, listen to this. But a person is not believed to say that I remember as a child, so and so always had a rite of passage on this field. Why, Rabbi say? Why not? Because remember, saying that someone has a rite of passage is a monetary claim. You are not believed to testify as an adult based on something you saw as a child regarding a monetary claim. Or similarly, Maimad u'mispad hayil leploni b'makom hazeh. Similarly, again, I will say, Maimad u'mispad means that halacha l'maisa. We saw this in Moed Katan. They used to have a custom that when taking the coffin, when taking the funeral bier to the cemetery, they would stop at certain places and eulogize the mace in those places. So an adult is not permitted to say that, is not believed to say, I remember as a child, they used to use this spot as for eulogies. Because I will say, once again, that's a monetary claim. What you're claiming is that field or that spot belongs to someone or doesn't belong to someone. So I will say, therefore, what you begin to see is something really amazing. So halacha l'maisa, we're introduced to the concept that an adult is believed to go ahead and give testimony regarding certain things that he experienced as a child. But however, when it comes to monetary claims, that type of testimony is not believable at all. So let's go back. Let's go. Says the Gemara. Amrav Yeshua v'hu sheyesh gadol imo. So this is very interesting. Yeshua says, by the way, when we say that an adult is believed to go ahead and give testimony of something that he experienced as a child, that's assuming what? There's someone else there's another adult giving testimony about the same thing along with him. In other words, that you have a regular witness. You have a regular witness. So I have one regular witness to whatever it is, and then the second witness is me, but I haven't seen it in my adult life. I saw it in my childhood. So something I saw in my childhood that I'm attesting to now, I could combine with another aid, and we can form a testimonial unit. So it says the Gemara, and here's what's interesting. The Mishnah begins with three of the same case. This is my father's handwriting, this is my Rebbe's handwriting, this is my brother's handwriting. I got it. You could attest to handwriting that you saw as a kid. You could attest in your adult life. Why only three different cases? I'll tell you why. I understand why I could testify about my father's handwriting, even though I only saw it in my childhood. Because why? Because the son is around his father a lot. So he's able to see the handwriting. Aval Rabo lo. But my Rebbe, who says I recognize my Rebbe's handwriting? Therefore, again, the Mishnah tells me even Rebbe. Or maybe I could testify about my Rebbe's handwriting. Why? Because there's a certain level of reverence that a student has about his Rebbe, and therefore I'm going to make sure to tell the truth. But maybe that same level of reverence doesn't apply to a father. And maybe if it just said my father's handwriting, my Rebbe's handwriting, why? My father because I'm around my father, my Rebbe because I have reverence for my Rebbe. The Leslie. But my brother, I don't have reverence for my brother, and nor do I have fear of my brother. So I'm sorry, I should say differently. I don't have reverence or / fear of my brother, nor am I necessarily always around my brother. Maybe I can't testify as to the validity of his signature. Kamash malano, kevan dikiyum shtaras midirabanan, heminu rabanan bidirabanan. I will say, what's the basis of this? The concept of kiyum shtar. So you will say, midaraisa. If you have a shtar, and that shtar is signed, what's the halacha? You're good to go. The concept of kiyum shtaros, of certifying documents, is a rabbinic concept. So because of that, the rabbis believed an adult to say, I recognize this signature from my childhood. Since certification of documents is rabbinic, the rabbis allowed this lower threshold for testimony as well. So therefore, again, pretty much, so case number one is, as an adult, I could testify that I recognize any of these signatures, my father, my Rebbe, my brother, from my childhood. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, next case is I could testify as an adult that I remember as a child, Rachel, when she got married, she went out with her hair down wearing a veil, indicating that she is a basula. So the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason for that? This is very interesting. The chazaka is that the majority of women who get married are basulos. So because of that, what I'm really testifying to is just an affirmation to what we believe to be the default. So therefore, again, that's why I'm believed to testify as an adult what I saw as a child. Incredible. Third case. I testify as an adult that I remember as a child, my friend Aaron from Cheder, right, would go ahead and leave Cheder early, cut school to go to the mikvah, right? He went ahead and he left Cheder to go to the mikvah, and then he went to eat truma. So the Gemara says, Vidilma Eved Kohen, who says that makes Aaron a Kohen? Maybe he's what? Maybe he's an Eved of a Kohen. Because we'll say, what's the halacha? The servant, right? The Eved of a Kohen is permitted to eat truma as well. So truma, and both say, we just had this sugya. Truma consumption doesn't necessarily mean that a person is a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Asali Adam Sheilamed is Avdo Torah. So both say, no, because remember, where is Aaron? Where is Aaron before he's eating truma? Where is he? He's in Cheder, right? He's in school. Shabbos say, this reflects the Rabbi Shimon Levi holds that Allah Chalamaisa, you're not allowed to teach an Eved Torah. Can't teach an Eved Torah. Is that true? Vatanya, we learned, Lava Hemeno Rabbo, if a master borrowed money from his servant, Osha Asa Rabba Apotropis Amadeus, or the master went ahead and made his servant an apotropos. So we'll say apotropos means he put him in charge of something, right? He put him in charge of his estate. Or the Eved put on tefillin in front of his master. Or the Eved read 3 psukim in shul. Harei ze lo yatsa lacherus. Now we'll say what's interesting is, all of these things seem to be demonstrative of freedom, right? Borrowing money from someone, becoming an apotropos, putting on tefillin, being the Baal Koreh. These all look like the actions of a free man. So the Gemara just says, just because the Eved is doing these things does not automatically mean that he is a free man. Now, why is this important for us? Because one of the examples is what? He's reading 3 psukim. He's learning Torah. So you see that an Eved can't learn Torah. Which the Gemara says, no. Hasam de ikri Eved midaito. Ki amrinan de kanog be. I'm sorry. Ki kamrinan de kanog be minag banim. They both say in the Brisa, the Eved is just reading psukim on his own. When Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said that you can't teach an Eved Torah, that means is you can't enroll the Eved in yeshiva to actively teach him Torah. Ultimately, again, the way that a father would normally teach his sons. So therefore, I will say, in this case over here, where the childhood memory is that Aaron was in yeshiva with me. He was in yeshiva with me. He would leave yeshiva, go to the mikvah, eat truma. The fact that he's enrolled in yeshiva attests to the fact that what? He's not an Eved, in conformance with the view of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, that you are not allowed to actively teach an Eved Torah the same way that one teaches their children Torah. Beautiful. Litba le'echal truma. And again, he would go to the mikvah. Again, same case, right? Aaron would leave yeshiva. He'd go to the mikvah to eat truma. But truma d'Rabbanan. Now, I will say, so just to be clear, what does this testimony allow Aaron to continue to do? Teach truma d'Rabbanan. But remember again, what you begin to see is that halacha l'maisa, this construct of an adult giving testimony based on things that he saw in his childhood only works for Dinei D'Rabbanan. So therefore, based on this testimony, Aaron would be allowed to continue to eat truma. What kind of truma? Truma D'Rabbanan. V'sheyachol kimanu ala goren. Furthermore, again, I saw another case. I testify that as a child, Aaron used to come with us to the granary, to get truma. V'dilma evet koinu. Once again, who says that means that Aaron is a kohen? Maybe Aaron is the slave of a kohen. And that's why he was at the granary getting truma. So the Gemara says, Tanan kiman do'amar ein cholkin truma la'eved, ele im kain rabo imar. Both say we had this sugya, right? We had this in Yavamas, right? So we'll say this Mishnah reflects the opinion who says that halacha l'maisa, we don't go ahead and give truma to an eved, not in the presence of, and it's not good English, right? We only give truma to an eved in the presence of his master. Rabbi say, why? What are we concerned about? Because if you give truma to an eved, not in the presence of his master, people may erroneously think that what? He's a free man. Right? He's a free man. Now he's a free man. He's a Kohen. So therefore, Rabbi say we never dispense truma to an eved if he's not with his master. This sanya ein chol kin truma li'eved ela im kein rabo imud Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds we only dispense truma to an eved if he's with his master. Rabbi Yossi Omer yachol hu sheyomar. Rabbi Yossi says not true. All right? If a guy shows up at the granary, he can say, "Listen, im kohen ani tinuli b'shvili." If you believe me that I'm a Kohen, then give me truma because I'm a Kohen. B'shvil me. Vim eved Kohen ani, and if you think that I'm the eved, tenu li b'shvil Rabbi. Then give me in the merit of my master. So we'll say, Rabbi Yossi says, so fundamental machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda says, we never give truma to an eved if he's not with his master. Rabbi Yossi says, yes, we do. And I will say, this yields another very important chilik. Listen to this. Bimkomosh Rabbi Yehuda hayu ma'alim mitruma leyuchsin. I will say in Rabbi Yehuda's locale, this is very important, Rabbi Yehuda's locale, if you ate truma, that was enough to certify your yichus. Your yichus, which I was saying now, and by the way, this all fits together. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot give truma to an eved not in the presence of his master, because again, truma consumption was a certification for yichus. In the locale of Rabbi Yossi, I will say then what? They would not, just because you ate truma, that was not enough to certify your yichus. So both an incredible story. We saw this all in Yavamas. So Tanya, Rabbi Yossi, miyamai lohi aditi. This is very interesting. Rabbi Yossi said, in general, I never gave testimony. And I will say that came from a concern that am I really able to convey objective truth? Because one time what happened? One time it happened, I gave testimony. So we're going to see what was the testimony about this type of situation. And as a result of my erroneous testimony, they certified an eved as a Kohen. The Gemara says, 1 second, really? That happened, that Rabbi Yossi gave incorrect testimony, and as a result they made an eved into a Kohen, to which the Gemara says, Hashta, ma behem nashal tzadikim, Kadosh Baruch Hu maybe takala yadam. I would say, if even the animals of tzadikim, Hashem doesn't allow Averos to be committed through them. Rashi says, this is that, we saw this on Yavamas, this was the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair. Both of the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair would not eat untithed produce. Incredible. We're not eating untithed. So I'll say, if Averos don't happen through the animals of tzaddikim, then certainly what? Averos don't happen through tzaddikim themselves. Tzaddikim atzal kol shekain. Elabikshu lalos evlakunapi. Rather, we'll say what happened. Rabbi Yossi said it almost happened that as a result of my testimony, they made an eved into a kohen. What happened? Rabbi Yossi say, I'll tell you what happened. So the Gemara says, Chaza ba'asri Rabbi Yossi, va'azal va'aseh ba'asri Rabbi Yehuda. Watch this. So we'll say, here's what happened. Rabbi Yossi said like this. I was in the city of Rabbi Yossi. And I saw a guy getting truma. Then I traveled to the city of Rabbi Yehuda. They asked me about this guy. And halacha l'maisa, I said, I saw him getting truma. So I'll say, watch this. In the city of Rabbi Yossi, they would dispense truma to even who? Avodim, even if they weren't in the presence of their master. Why? Why? Because in the city of Rabbi Yossi, they did not take truma consumption to be a certification of one's yichus. So sure, you're an Ever Kohen, here you go. So I said, that's what Rabbi Yossi saw. That's what he saw. But then he gave this information in the city of Rabbi Yehuda. But in the city of Rabbi Yehuda, we'll say, what was that halacha? What was that halacha? They would not dispense truma to an eved not in the presence of his master. Why? Because in the city of Rabbi Yehuda, they used truma consumption as certification for yichus. So Rabbi say, so because of that, when he comes to the city of Rabbi Yehuda and he says, oh, I saw Aaron going ahead and eating truma. Okay, you saw him eating truma. Truma is enough of a certification for yichus, and they were ready to declare Aaron. They were ready to declare Aaron a Kohen, even though Aaron was really what? Aaron was really an eved. I would say, so again, just absolutely fascinating. I will say, it's also an incredible musar. Because I will say, during these days, when our primary goal is to go ahead and work on sinas chinam, and to go ahead, not work on bettering sinas chinam, but rather work on avoiding sinas chinam, right? To go ahead and really work on our avas chinam. I will say, so many times relationship friction is caused because people see things in different ways, and people are dealing with two different sets of circumstances, two different sets of realities. Isn't it incredible? It's the same case over here. It's the same case. It's the same Aaron eating truma. Just the difference is, in the locale of Rabbi Yossi, that's a meaningless act, so to speak. And in the locale of Rabbi Yehuda, it's a powerfully important act. Same act, just two different perspectives. We have to train ourselves to, just because we see things in a certain way, does not mean everyone else sees it that way, nor does it mean that that's the unequivocal truth. And if we're able to work on ourselves to recognize that there are other perspectives, there are other points of view, there are other ways of viewing even the most important of issues, then we run a real possibility of creating meaningful avas chinam within Klal Yisrael. So we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Good to see everyone.